ladies and gentlemen, for the past 6 months, the world media has talked about a Central American peace plan. This was proposed originally by the President of Costa Rica, Oscar Arias, and signed by the 4 democratic presidents of Central America and dictator Ortega of Nicaragua in Guatemala, the 7th of August of this year. In this speech, I would like to share with you what has been the impact of that peace plan and what is the present situation of the Nicaraguan resistance today. The Nicaraguan people regard this peace plan with favor. They see it as a chance to establish order and tranquility in Nicaraguan homes, today sunk in anguish over the daily news of the death in war among Nicaraguans, a war unleashed by the imposition of a totalitarian system of government in my country. But the people of Nicaragua also love freedom. We know our rights. We are a brave people who know when to heed the call to arms when our love of freedom and our rights leave no other choice. The people of Nicaragua are deeply anxious over what meaning this initiative of the President of Costa Rica may have for their destiny. That initiative was materialized into a document recording firm commitments by the Central American presidents. These documents wisely harvest the feeling of the Nicaraguan people and of all the peoples of Central America, that the only way to a lasting peace is the establishment of a democratic government and institutions in Central America. For the last half-century, we Nicaraguans have suffered under 2 dictatorships: 40 years of the Somoza family and dictatorship under the right, and the last 8 years under the Marxist-Leninist dictatorship of the Sandinista front. Each regime led to a war of liberation. A popular insurrection supported by all democratic forces of the country shattered the Somoza dynasty. Today, in the heart of Nicaragua, the Sandinistas face another war of liberation. We Nicaraguans may not necessarily be able to define what democracy means, but when we are persecuted for our beliefs and jailed for hating our conscience, when our free information media are continuously closed, and attempts made to swing our whole culture and even our religious feelings to a party line, we know that democracy is absent for such deeds. And we become aware of the importance of democracy for peace at home and peace abroad, as well on our own personal inner peace. We have also lived in an unjust society. We have seen much poverty and deprivation, great social imbalances. We too know of the thirst for justice. For blood has been shed in my country also for the sake of justice. But unlike those who believe that justice excludes liberty, we believe firmly that both things are complementary. I say that we Nicaraguans look with anxiety to the future of the peace plan of the Central American presidents. Once already, in our recent history, the principal democratic currents that struggle against Somoza signed an agreement with the Sandinista Front, who spearhead the military campaign, committing themselves to a future social justice and democracy. That was on the 12th of July, 1979, days before the fall of Somoza, when the future Junta of National Reconciliation, that I was part of, presented the Organization of American States, OAS, with a plan of government and a statute of rights and guarantees of the Nicaraguan people. Both documents reflected the yearning for justice and liberty of the great majority of the Nicaraguan people. It is precisely that same priceless document which the Sandinistas have violated systematically in the 8 years in which they have held power. And if they violated their commitments on that early date, substituting a totalitarian project for the democratic project, then what new factors will check them in their zeal to continue that ideological scheme? What will keep them from shirking in these new commitments contracted with the Central American democracies? I would like to return to the matter of the current word of liberation. This word is the surest, strongest response of the Nicaraguan people to the totalitarian system advanced by the Sandinista Front. There exist other responses, other consequences of that system. 500,000 Nicaraguans live in exile, which in a population of over 2.5 million inhabitants means 20% of the population. There are 10,000 political prisoners, according to the Commission of Human Rights controlled by the Sandinistas themselves, although the leaders of the party offered lesser figures. And there are all the Nicaraguans who one way or another suffer the consequences of the twisted policies of the Sandinistas within our country: hunger, deprivation, instability, insecurity, terror of the state. All these are products of the blindness of the revolutionary leaders and of corruption, of the obsession with party work instead of productive work, of the paranoia of the commandantes who have filled public office, private enterprise, and neighborhoods with spies, the relentless persecution of all political organizations, labor unions, and independent civil bodies, which survive only through the plunk of their leaders and the moral courage of their members. The answer of the Nicaraguan people to these outrages is the war of liberation. This war is their answer to the arbitrariness, misgovernment, and lack of justice of the Sandinistas, who have created a power elite which shamelessly enjoys the scam wealth of the country, while the people seek to levels of poverty more depressing than ever before. The freedom fighters, for the most part, are peasants and Indians fighting in defense of their livelihoods. They fight the arbitrary confiscation that affects even their small properties. They fight for their homes, which are threatened by the massive relocation schemes designed to displace popular support for the resistance. They fight for their religious beliefs, their traditions, their culture, their safety, and their lives, in order to reach all the benefits which only an authentically democratic system can give them. They die. the Sandinistas have unleashed against their own people a giant military machine. This machine was put at their disposal by the Soviet Union. They have conscribed army of over 75,000 regulars, 10 times larger than that of Somoza. From January to June of this year alone, they received over $300 million in war supplies from the Soviet bloc. They have completely taken over the propaganda machinery of communism to further a campaign of slander against those who fight for liberty. Unfortunately, this campaign has had a deep impact on many persons and institutions who do not know firsthand of the situation in Nicaragua. One of the great lies of the Sandinistas is to affirm that the freedom fighters are former National Guardmen. During the days of Somoza, the National Guard never had more than 7,000 men, of whom nearly 4,000 are in prison in Nicaragua. Many former guardmen now live in the United States. Others who participated in the first insurrection against the Sandinistas have been killed. The army of the Nicaraguan resistance has approximately 15,000 men. The figures of the FSLN, the Frente Sandinista, claim to have inflicted over 15,000 casualties to the resistance, which gives a total of over 30,000 Nicaraguans, each and every one of whom was put his life on the line to free Nicaragua from the Sandinistas. Currently, 40% of the combatants are peasants with no previous military experience. Some 59% came from the ranks of the Sandinista army and militia themselves, and only a little bit above 1% belong to the old National Guard. The Sandinista commandantes have repeated ad nauseam that the economic chaos in which the country has descended and the lack of freedom which has marked their government are the result of the war of liberation. This argument falls of its own weight. The decline on the Nicaraguan economy began when the comandantes began to consolidate a totalitarian project. I have already pointed to some of the causes: the politicization of the productive activities, incompetent administration, and corruption. War and other international economic factors have influenced this decline, but its central cause is found in the misguided policies of the regime in Managua. Nicaragua's economy structure is designed to absorb $850 million worth of imports. This is the foreign exchange it takes to keep the machinery of Nicaragua in motion. Yet imports descended to barely 430 million this past year. The effect on productivity has been devastating. The economy now functions at about 40% capacity. Revenue from exports fell from $450 million in 1980 to $230 million last year. In Somoza's time, it got to close to $1,000 million. Inflation in the price of basic goods is thought to be at about 1,200% in 1979. The dollar that was valued at the Córdoba that was valued at 10 Cordobas, local currency, to $1, today is at 17,000 Cordobas to $1 in the black market. Our foreign debt rose from $1.7 billion in 1979 to nearly $5.7 billion 2 years ago. The per capita income has fallen to levels which Nicaragua superseded 30 years ago. Concerning the lack of liberty, some people are led to believe that the problem will end with the lifting of the state of emergency which has been enforced for over 5 years. Yet, a truthful look at the world will show that the lack of liberty is the common characteristic of all communist regimes. This is the model which the Sandinista comandantes admire and advance at the goal of their social engineering. Such political and ideological dependence on the Soviet bloc and the Leninist nature of the Sandinista ideology has been publicly admitted by the comandantes in many of their speeches. 70% of the reading material in Nicaragua comes from the Progress Printing House in Moscow, and the works of Marx, Lenin, Castro, and other authors patronized by the Soviets abound. What is notorious is the absence of books by socialist writers who follow a line other than that of Moscow. Photographs of Fidel Castro and Che Guevara loom large in many public offices, and propaganda posters from Soviet bloc countries may be seen everywhere in the principal cities in Nicaragua. That lack of liberty and civil rights which marks the Nicaragua of the Sandinista comandantes is intrinsic of the Soviet model, with war or without war. Marx called that lack of liberties the dictatorship of the proletariat, and saw it as a short transition period. The Sandinistas call it popular democracy and consider that it must last until the disappearance of free enterprise from the planet. This is one important obstacle to democracy which those who have not lived under a Leninist system are unable to imagine. It is that in countries such as Nicaragua, the army, the secret police, and the state security, and all national forces, such as television, belongs to the party. In the United States, the institution entrusted to the state belongs to the state, not the party which happens to be in power. Imagine a presidential election in the United States if all the television stations belong to the Democrats, or for the matter to the Republicans, and the opposition party were allowed 10 minutes a week during the election campaign, even as the government helps itself to all the remaining time. This is what happened in Nicaragua during the mock elections of November of 1984. In the last 6 years, 12 concrete proposals for peace and democracy had been advanced by several entities now joined in the Nicaraguan resistance. All were ignored or rejected by the Sandinistas. His intransigence prevents them from seeing what a direct compromise with their own people is the only alternative to war. War to rescue our country from political, economical, and social disaster. What most worries Nicaraguans about the future of the Central American peace plan, which as I have said, identified peace with democracy, is that the Sandinistas continue to insist that the ideological system will not be altered because, quote, the people already voted for it with their historic bullet. The Sandinistas comandantes see the peace plan as a way to destroy and eventually eliminate the Nicaraguan resistance. As part of their implementation of this plan, the Sandinistas will suspend their campaign of some abuses and violation of civil and political rights until they have achieved the objective I have just mentioned. This is the policy in which they shall invest to cash in on later with rich dividends. It is the present of the Nicaraguan resistance, the heroism, the strength, the martyrdom of its freedom fighters, which has prevented the Sandinistas from complete consolidation of its totalitarian project. It is to the resistance that we owe the existence of the internal opposition and the last vestige of the liberty on which to build a democratic system. It was this permanent military and political pressure of the Nicaraguan resistance which forced Daniel Ortega to sit at the bargaining table with the presidents of Central American democracies. The resistance is the only guarantee we have for the Sandinistas to live up to their promises. The plan contains no sanctions for lack of fulfillment, yet the only language which the comandantes have understood till now is the language of force. The Sandinistas were born as an armed movement, and it has kept to the track throughout its entire history. Another of the great faults of the Central American plan is that it gave no voice in the national dialogue to the resistance. The Nicaraguan Civil War is a war between the Sandinista regime and the people of Nicaragua. The natural counterpart of the Sandinistas in a peace process is the Nicaraguan resistance. Without its participation, no peace process will be complete, since its results will not have taken into account the hopes and dreams of the thousands of Nicaraguans who gave their blood or language in prison and exile because of the totalitarianism of the new dictatorship. In the 2 months since the signing of the Guatemala Agreement, the Sandinistas have sustained a chain of repression against independent organizations. They arbitrarily arrested opposition leaders, including the director of the Independent Human Rights Commission, who long struggled for respect of human rights, and more recently, 18 militants of the Social Christian Party of Nicaragua during the celebration in the north of the country for the 30th anniversary of that party. Repeatedly, they have declared that they will not live up to the agreement in full. For example, Ortega declared that former members of the Old National Guard who have been in jail for the last 8 years simply for having belonged to that institution, and the thousands of Nicaraguans condemned by unconstitutional and illegal tribunals for supposed activities against the regime shall not be freed under the decree of amnesty. The Sandinistas have confined themselves to putting in practice partial measures which resound abroad, such as liberating non-Nicaraguan prisoners and permitting La Prensa and Radio Católica, the Catholic radio, to reopen. Yet, the other independent means of communications remain closed, and thousands of Nicaraguans remain in prison for their beliefs. Of its own, the resistance has taken concrete steps to manifest its political will to fulfill the spirit of the accords, despite not having been taken into the account in the same. Freeing 80 Sandinista war prisoners, for example, of whom just 20 choose to return to Nicaragua. The others remain in democratic Costa Rica. We offered to negotiate a ceasefire, but the Sandinistas have always refused. The political struggle against Sandinismo is long and harsh. We must demand complete fulfillment of the agreement, the dismantling of the repressive apparatus, and an end to blurring the distinctions between state, army, and party. Only this will create the indispensable condition for a truly democratic process to develop in Nicaragua. While the objective conditions for democratization of the country has not been given, and the Sandinistas give no sign of a genuine will to participate in a democratic process which will culminate in a free and honest election. The Nicaraguan resistance must remain on its post, intact and ready to resume its patriotic commitment should dictator Ortega violate the agreement of Guatemala or to take its rightful place in an authentic national army whose duty is to guard the interests of all Nicaraguans. God bless you. Thank you very much.